Welcome today to a very special edition of Urban Legends Unmasked. We are on location in Lake City, Colorado, outside of the Hinsdale County Museum. It is a fascinating museum for such a small town of only 300 to 400 people, but has tremendous history. It talks a lot about mining in Colorado in the 1800s. It has a lot to do with just really the culture and the way things worked during that time. But it also has some history that is often a little darker, a little bit more sinister. We're going to be talking today about something that is not typical to Urban Legends Unmasked. We're going to be talking about something that is, in fact, not legend at all. It actually happened. And that somehow makes it even scarier. We're going to be talking about the legend and the history of Alferd Packer, the Colorado Cannibal. Welcome to today's episode of Urban Legends Unmasked. I'm your host, Chad Lerman. Nestled at about 8,000 feet in the San Juan Rockies and boasting a population of around 400 year-round, you will find Lake City, Colorado. This small town booms in the summers, however, when thousands visit the idyllic town for a respite. But the beautiful scenery masks a darker, more sinister legend. The following is what we can say for certain did actually happen. Alferd Packer, along with about 20 other men, decided they wanted to find some gold in 1873. They began their trek in Salt Lake City, traveling south and east until they came to the camp of Chief Ouray, a Ute leader. Chief Ouray knew the mountains of the San Juans and knew that the winter was going to be a harsh one and warned the men against going any further. The men, however, decided to go ahead and press their luck. First, a group of 5 went. They were found dead shortly after. And then, in February of 1874, Packer and 5 other men, Shannon Bell, James Humphrey, Frank Miller, George Noon, and the oldest, Israel Swan, decided to make their trip. Only Alferd Packer arrived at the Los Piños Agency. This particular man met them, Charles Adams. Adams evaluated the story, asked very few questions, and noted that actually Packer was in pretty good shape, all things considered. So it's at this point that things begin to unravel for Packer. And what really begins to happen is that he first goes to gamble. Okay, he shows up by himself, 5 men not there. He goes to gamble, he wins himself a horse, and he proceeds to kind of try to get away. At some point, he does reveal to somebody when they ask, how did you get the money to gamble and to do all these things? He kind of admitted that, well, old man Israel Swan died on the trip, and so, I ate him. Flat out, that's it. I ate him, he was dead, good times done for this guy. I'm assuming that since he didn't indicate this directly, he probably took Swan's money. Now, he says nothing about Bell, Humphrey, Miller, or Noon, just that Israel Swan was dead. Now, obviously, this becomes problematic. And so, at this point, something new's got to happen. Adams began to be suspicious that something wasn't adding up when he noticed that Packer had a lot of stuff he shouldn't have, namely the stuff that belonged to all the other men. So he began to ask some more questions, at which point Packer confessed that along the trail, each man had died or had been killed and then consumed by the other men. And the last man standing had been killed by Packer, and Packer used his flesh to stay alive. That is what we refer to as story number 1. Almost immediately, Packer changed his story and then claimed, well, the first 2 died of starvation and we ate them first, and then the others were, killed and eaten. Adams, who seems to have absolutely no clue what's going on in the world, had this to say. Mr. Packer looked quite fat when he arrived here and has since shown signs of mental aberration, which is said to be the consequence of eating human flesh. Okay, hold on. Alferd Packer shows up after being trapped in the wilderness for months on end, and you think he looks fat, and you don't think something weird is going on. That blows my mind. I don't know who this guy is or why he thinks he knows, why he doesn't pick up on, everybody else is dead, and you are a little pleasantly plump there for coming off of a winter in the harsh San Juan Mountains. Needless to say, eventually what happens is Packer is arrested. And Packer is placed into a jail cell in the area. But that's not the end of the story. It gets even better. Story number 3 by Mr. Packer goes along like these lines: that Swan died first, natural causes or whatever, and then was consumed by the other 5 people. After that, Humphreys died and was also eaten, and then they took his money. They divvied it up. Finally, what was ended up happening is the butcher was killed, quote-unquote, accidentally, who was then eaten as well. Then the man named Bell shot the other man with Swan's gun, and Bell attempted to kill Packer, at which point Packer claims he shot Bell and ate him. So now we have the third story, which is that the first couple of guys died of natural causes. Someone killed someone else in the next 3, and that left poor defenseless Packer to defend himself against Bell with his gun. Anyway, Packer goes to jail. But the jail is really just a cabin, so Packer doesn't stay there very long, and he escapes. And he is on the run for 9 years. So unfortunately, we can't go to the actual site of the massacre where Alferd Packer did what he did. It is, however, right over my shoulder. And this location used to be public access. There's a memorial there for the 5 victims. There's like a little plaque that kind of explains what goes on. Unfortunately, it's now on private property, so we can't actually go over and take a look at it without, possibly getting another memorial named after you. You never know. So anyway, the point is, this area right over here, over my shoulder, as you can see, is where a tremendous tragedy occurred. But the tragedy then led to questions. And while this is a factual event, while we know this did occur, this is where some of the legend comes into play. FYI, I am camping like 50 yards that way. So I am as close as I can possibly be to this thing, and I think that's making it kind of cool. So Packer's living under an alias way up north somewhere, working with some of the same guys that were in the original group, under an assumed name, and no one says anything. Anyway, Packer's arrested 9 years later, and he's actually brought back to Lake City to stand trial for the original crime of murder and cannibalism. It's during this time that he changes his story for a 4th time. And in this situation, Packer has gone off to scout, and when he comes back, oh my gosh, they're all dead. It's not me, I wasn't even around, they're all dead. Killed each other. Might as well have a buffet, apparently. I'm standing here in front of the Hinsdale County Courthouse, which was built, as you can see up here, in 1877. This building is pretty much original to 1877, especially the upstairs courthouse. The floors are the same, the furniture is the same, the chandeliers, the lighting is the same. And that's significant because while many people met their fate in this courthouse, one of the most important trials involves Alferd Packer. The sensational trial of Alferd Packer began there in Hinsdale County, and as expected, he was found guilty. Now, originally he was found guilty and sentenced to death for the murders. And in fact, the judge, according to some local legends, had a quite colorful way of pronouncing said sentence. The quote that you can find on allthat'sinteresting.com, as well as several of the other facts listed here, goes on to say this: "And please, oh please, forgive me for my accent. Stand up, you voracious man-eating son of a bitch, and receive your sentence. When you came to Hinsdale County, there was 7 Democrats, but you ate 5 of them, goddamn ya. I sentence you to be hanged by the neck until you're dead, 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 as a warning again reducing the Democratic population of this county. Packer, you Republican cannibal, I would sentence you to hell, but the statutes forbid it." People were colorful back then, wouldn't you say? In any case, Packer was never actually going to be executed. Some legal maneuvering occurred later on due to a law, basically the way the law had been passed. His sentence was reduced to manslaughter as opposed to murder, and he was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Even that didn't last. Between 15 and 17 years later, the Denver Post began to publish a series of exposés, I guess you could say, although they wouldn't have referred to it that way, in which they basically pointed out that Packer was wrongfully accused, that he deserved to get out. He'd served his time. He had a lot to deal with, and he was eventually released early. At which point he moved to the Denver area and worked for the Denver Post until he was, at the age of 65, dead of dementia. And apparently also a vegetarian. Okay, so very, very interesting story. I mean, obviously things were run very differently back then than they are now. But where we come to this point is that we still really don't know what happened. We're 150 plus years out from this event, and yet we're still kind of like putting the pieces together. We've got really 4 distinct stories here that Alferd Packer himself told. We don't really know what occurred. So obviously, you know, this being Urban Legends Unmasked, like this sort of lends to this question of what really happened. So I want to take a second and let's look at the 4 theories. So the first theory, proposed by Alferd Packer himself, is that everybody just kind of died along the way. Okay, you know, this guy died. Let's, you know, take a little piece and we'll use it to survive as we go into this rugged area. The only problem with that theory is that, as we'll see here in a minute, I'm going to post you like a picture or two, the bodies were discovered in one spot. So very quickly we can write that one off. Like Packer was wrong about that. They did not die one by one. Nobody is going to carry an entire body in that situation into the mountains when you're already starving and struggling to survive. So theory number 2 is that a couple of them died early on, and then there was some sort of, you know, killing that occurred on the other 3. Now, again, same problem arises. Like if 2 of them died earlier, you're not dragging the body with you. So again, bodies being found all in the same spot, this is a problem. It's not the way it works. Theory 3. So theory 3 basically comes down to that Packer had observed, or he had been walking around, like 2 guys died, and then there was an accident in which another guy was killed. Don't know exactly what kind of accident we're talking about here. And then there was some sort of altercation or fight between 2 of the men, and it left Bell alive. And Bell is this guy who maybe he's driven mad by hunger or, you know, whatever it is. He comes after Packer, and Packer in self-defense kills the man. Now, this one actually has some interesting stuff. In the 1950s, on Cannibal Plateau, which is that location that is where this all occurred, they actually discovered a Colt revolver that had 2 fired shots, 2 cylinders fired off, backing up this story that Bell had tried to attack Packer and Packer shot him in self-defense. Leading to some of the people who discovered it to actually argue that, well, hey, you know what? We exonerated the guy. Like, Packer is self-defense. Like, he did the whole thing. Can't blame a guy for eating somebody if it's what you need to survive, but he didn't murder anybody. And it wasn't even manslaughter. It was self-defense. I think that's a bit of a leap as well, to make that assumption. And I think really what kind of bothers me about that theory is that Packer told 4 different stories. 9 years later, he gets to the 4th story, and this is the one that like, this is where I'm like, he couldn't have been completely innocent. Because in this story, now he didn't even, like, it's not, like, self-defense, I think, is still on the table here with Bell, but, like, he didn't see what happened with the other things. I'm off scouting, and I'll come back, and everybody's dead. Like, that's his final story. I know nothing. I don't know what happened. I just protected myself from this guy. Now, maybe his changing story could be a lot of different factors. Maybe there's a lot of different theories as to what happened there. Maybe he was afraid when he first got back. Maybe he knew that if he shared, hey man, I had to live off of these bodies up there, that people would look at him badly, that he would be blamed, and he knew it would be his word against nothing. So maybe that's why it changed. Maybe it changed because he was in shock. Like, obviously we don't really know what he went through. Maybe the memories were taking their time to come back. Maybe that's really why it changed, that things kept shifting. Psychology really wasn't a thing yet. And so understanding how memory worked and how all those eyewitness testimonies and those kind of things happened didn't really make a lot of sense. So maybe that's why the story changed so many times. But my fifth theory is that Packer did all of it. Like that's the dark secret. Maybe Packer was this like psychopathic killer and he was just waiting for an opportunity and it happened. He got to do what he wanted to do. Maybe that's it. I don't know, but I don't think, I have a problem with that theory too, because I don't think that if you look at the rest of Packer's life, Packer didn't do anything like that. Maybe you want to argue he got it out of his system, but that doesn't seem to be the way psychopaths work. In any case, for 150 years, we've had this guy who lives on the fringes of American history, who did some really dark stuff to make it to survive. And he did. He survived. He lived. Maybe he really was just a guy in the wrong place at the wrong time. And he did what he could to survive. Maybe he enjoyed it a little bit, but we don't know. And that's where the legend comes in. There's all these different things, and it survives into society. Like we look at all these different stories that come from Alferd Packer, and even the guys who did South Park made a musical about it. Cannibal the musical. It's influenced other movies, horror genres. It may not get all the press that the Donner Party does, but for what it's worth, in my opinion, it's a far more intriguing story. Because we know so little of what actually happened, what actually occurred, which is why I think it kind of resonates, not just in the minds of those who visit, but even in the locals there of Lake City. So as we talk about this whole thing of Alferd Packer, and just how does Lake City really deal with Cannibal being one of their main story points? Well, they deal with it by having the Packer Saloon, which is of course a name for Alferd Packer, but they go a step further and they deal with it by calling it the Cannibal Grill. So yeah, that is an excellent way to deal with a dark history of your town. And so when you come here, it's great. It's actually really good food. I highly recommend it. Check it out sometime. They have some good burgers, if you can get over the, irony of the situation. So that's it. That's the Alferd Packer legend. The community has some interesting things. It is a fun, I recommend going to Lake City. It's a beautiful, beautiful area. The museum is actually kind of interesting too. A couple other little side things. The museum that we kind of started out with at the very beginning, they have some of the things that Packer did while he was in prison. He made horse bridles, and they actually have one that he had made there in the Hinsdale County Museum. But even, and this is where we go back into that creepy area, he also made very intricate doll houses. And one of the doll houses that Alferd Packer actually made while he was in prison is on display there at the Hinsdale County Museum. Fascinating piece of history, and just a very interesting thing. For what it's worth, the horror writer in me wants to find nefarious deeds here and evil things, but really just looking into it, the more like exploring this, I really think Packer was just a guy who had some bad luck, some really bad luck. And maybe he wasn't the most educated man. Maybe he just didn't know how to deal with it. And, when all the questions and stuff is flying at him, he responds. And I think if nothing else can be said, Alferd Packer is a survivor. He survived so many things. And at the end of the day, really, all of these urban legends, I try to look for the moral. There's a couple here. One, if a Native American chief tells you don't go into the mountains, I know this is bad, listen to him. Like he knew what he was talking about. Chief Ouray, good guy. In fact, one of the other side notes is that the people who didn't go through the mountains stayed with the Ute tribe there, the Ouray's tribe, and they showed up in great shape, well taken care of. Like, man, they were great hosts. Everything was wonderful. So some really good stuff that came out of that. Maybe if more people had stayed, there'd be a lot more people alive. Who knows? But another moral of this is honestly like, be careful how you judge what people go through. This is an extreme case. I mean, obviously, I am not like if Alferd Packer were to be sitting across from me and saying like, hey, you know, prepared you a dinner, I'm probably going to pass. Like, just saying. But at the same time, don't judge him for what he had to go through. What would you do in that situation? What would you do to survive? Keeping in mind that there is, you know, we're talking the middle of nowhere. And if you ever visit Lake City, you'll know exactly what I mean. I mean, recognizing where he was, where this particular event occurred, at that time, there was nothing. There was mountains on either side of you, mountains to the north, mountains to the south, mountains to the east, mountains to the west, trees everywhere. There are bears, there are like mountain lions, there are all sorts of creatures out there. And to be honest, he had no idea how far he was in the midst of a snow blind as well. So with that in mind, you know, I think this is a fascinating story. I think that's there's definitely some local legends that go along with it. You know, you kind of wonder if that courthouse might be haunted. And actually, if you do go to Lake City, I'm going to do another little plug here. They occasionally will do what's called a ghost tour. And really what they do is they look at just sort of like past things that have happened in the community. And for a community of that small, they get a lot of ghost stories. Some really good ones too, especially at the courthouse. Which, again, like I said in the video, you know, I didn't get to go into the courthouse this time. They've kind of changed the rules a little bit. But I did get to go into the courthouse a long time ago, back in the early 2000s, when I went on the ghost tour for the first time. And it's exactly like that drawing that you saw earlier on, like that image still looks exactly like that. Floors are the same, chandeliers are the same. I mean, it is truly like stepping back into time. And so that's kind of a neat thing. They apparently do small tours of the courthouse, but you kind of have to be really lucky on when they do that. So if you can get to do that, I recommend it, because standing in those spots where this historical event and numerous other ones occurred, it's a very interesting tale. I hope you've enjoyed this on location, and actually I kind of hope to do some more of these in the future. I'm looking for some other local legends I can maybe visit when gas prices go down, because that was a lot. But again, I love this story. I think it's a great, interesting story. It's fascinating, and definitely going to feed into some of my writing later on. Last but not least, as always, I want to plug, just if you get a chance, check out the books that are out there. Sawyer Shepherd Chronicles, which is in part inspired by the Alferd Packer legend. There's a whole like sort of side story about this pastor that goes crazy and cannibalizes people in the 1800s, but he didn't. It's part of the story. Anyway, that particular thing is something that you might want to check out. That story kind of kicks things off. It's a big part of the plot, but it comes from that. Like that idea, that concept came from, honestly, like reading the material at the Cannibal Plateau when you could still go there. I've also got Killtown, which has nothing to do with this at all, other than both Lake City and Kingston, Texas, in the story are towns with one road in and one road out. Then most recently, Beneath These Brittle Bones, which is sort of my most supernatural horror that I've written. That's straight supernatural horror, not like Sawyer Shepherd supernatural thriller kind of stuff. So anyway, check out those books if you can on Amazon, and be back next time. We're going to actually do an actual Colorado legend next time, not this on-location joyous ride that we've been on. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.